everybody, welcome back. Great Northwest Weaponry. This is Thomas, and today we're taking a look at something cool, something I've really wanted to get for quite some time into my collection here. Italian Army marked Beretta Model 1934. This one being dated 1942, so right at the height of World War I.
False! It was World War II. Dingus!
Again, this is something I've really wanted. I've finally officially got the big three Axis Powers pistols covered. You know, Walther P38, Nambu Type 14, Beretta Model 1934. This is, again, the Italian Army version, so 380. Also happens to be the first 380 that we've taken a look at. And the first Beretta that belongs to me. We did look at my buddy Colin's Beretta Model 1952 some time ago, of which for the Navy actually replaced this. The Army would actually stick with this forever, though. But before we get too far into that, let's just go ahead and go over to the gun room and talk some Beretta history.
The Beretta Model 1934 is another example in my collection that the how and why of its coming to be is pretty straightforward. In the early 1930s, the Italian Army was still primarily using the Beretta Model 1915 from World War I, and yes, this time I mean World War I. Little self-deprecating humor there a minute ago. I hope you appreciated it. They were also still, to my understanding, using the Beretta revolver, which I would love to get one of each of those guns at some point in the future. That would pretty much round out my entire Italian collection at this point. Making some progress with my my collecting here. I'm getting some you know, smaller collections within the collection complete at this point. But Beretta could not have the Italian Army looking elsewhere for a new gun. They actually kind of panicked because in the early 30s, the Walther PP was looking like a good alternative. The Army was quite impressed with it. So to stop the Army from looking to Germany for their new gun, Beretta very quickly pumped out the new Model 1934, which has a very classic Beretta look with the, you know, open top slide where you can see the majority of the barrel. Like, this just looks like a tiny M92, of which, by the way, the M92 is what would officially replace this. The Army kept these in service forever, clear up till I've seen 1991 or 92 stated as the date that it was officially replaced. I've also seen both stated as the date that production ceased. But roughly 1 million were made. This was the most widely produced pistol by Beretta in the World War II era. And as everybody knows, you know, if you're even remotely familiar with guns, Beretta is one of the, you know, monoliths of the gun industry, especially in the last 30 or 40 years. Well, really since the introduction of the M92. That design was used by everybody and their dog, but this is still about the Model 1934. So this is a World War II fascist Italy example. And again, as I'd stated earlier, this is an Army example. There are a number of markings that we'll be looking at when we go to the tabletop that clearly denote both, you know, fascist era production and Army versus, you know, Navy, Air Force, police. I'll be going over what the markings for pretty much all of those are, but these were purpose-built for military use, both purpose-built and designed. Like, the entire reason it came to be was Walther did not want to lose their Army contract specifically. So there are a number of different slight variations that you can find of these. There's a Romanian example that uses a Russian-style sight system instead of the more Western European style sights that you see on this. There is also a separate model that came very shortly after this one called the Model 1935, and that can cause some confusion. I've brought this gun up actually to some people, and oh, I have a Beretta Model 1934, and they're like, there is no 1934, it's a 1935. There's actually both. The 1935 is chambered in 32 ACP, not 380. Which the Italians called 9mm Corto, and that is marked on the side of the gun over here. A significant amount of the 1935s actually were sent to Germany in World War II. I would love to get my hands on an example, but for all intents and purposes, they're the same gun, just a different caliber. A lot of the later wartime examples of the Model 1935, I'm really feeling like I said 32 at some point. I probably did. Anyway, a lot of the later examples of the 1935 did have a phosphate finish, and you could very quickly distinguish one of those from one of these. Speaking of finishes, you'll see a number of these where the slide is like a red color almost, and that very much is a wartime thing where just the dyes and the manner in which it was blued were lacking. So grips can be slightly different variations of color because of dyes. Slide can be different color, or the frame, just based on rushed production, especially later in the war. And this example, when I picked it up, it came with an original holster. I do not believe, if it is numbered, I can't see it. So this holster's in kind of rough condition, but we do have an original holster and a spare magazine. And I do not believe magazines on these are numbered, so impossible to say for certain if this one was issued with this gun, but to my understanding, they were issued with 2 magazines originally. So the Italian holsters, generally pretty easy to identify an original just based on the wear and tear of leather over 80 plus years, but they were this weird kind of green dyed color, kind of a olive drab green almost. But again, a lot of that is worn off on this example because it's kind of rough, of which I actually kind of like, because it kind of tells me that this thing, was in the thick of it. At least the holster. And if the holster came with the gun, then you could extend that to the gun as well. Interesting fact. The 1948 assassination of Mahatma Gandhi was performed with one of these, kind of a grim little mark on its history, not to mention the fact that, it served with the Axis, which is, you don't really need to get a lot more grim than that. But that particular gun was a 1934 dated example, serial number 606824. So if you happen to stumble across that one, you just won the friggin' lottery. I don't know that I don't know where that example is, if it's accounted for or not. It probably is. It's probably either in a museum or was destroyed, would be my assumption. Anyway, we got actually a bit to talk about when it comes to markings on this one. So if I hadn't mentioned already, approximately 1 million of these were made, maybe a little more than 1 million. And yeah, I know we covered that they were produced all the way up until 1991 or 92. So yeah, I think it's about time we transition to the tabletop. I've only got a few markings we're going to take a look at here, but they do require a bit of explaining. And I'm going to give you a heads up. My Italian is about as good as my French. And if you've watched our back catalog, you know that's not a good thing. So to any Italian speakers and or Italian nationals in the audience, I sincerely apologize for what you're about to hear. First mark of importance, we're going to start with the date, as that is going to be a little easier for me to explain. So Mussolini, when he took power, added a second calendar to the Italian canon, I guess. So these guns have 2 dates printed on them. You can see it at the tail end of the legend here. So you got a 1942 and then an XXI. So 1942 is pretty obvious. That's your Julian calendar date. XXI is your fascist date. And within the year 1942, it could either be XX or XXI. The reason for that is the new year on the fascist calendar is the 28th of October, 1922. So this could be XX or XXI, depending on if it was before or after October 28th. So this is a late 1942 example. Last 2 months of the year, basically. only has a couple of days. It could have possibly been in October, and it's, you know, somewhat unlikely. But the other marking, actually, before we go to military acceptance stamps, a real quick note. So in the legend, it says Cal 9 Quarto. That is going to be on all of your Italian examples, but there are also Romanian contract examples of the 1934. We mentioned this briefly when we mentioned the sites. If it is a Romanian example, it is going to say 9mm Skirt, S-C-U-R-T. That is Romanian for short. So Quarto is Italian for short, Skirt, Romanian for short. I'm not aware of other markings within the legend to be concerned about, so we're now going to move over to this little marking here at the tip of my finger. It's an RE with a crown over it. This is your military acceptance stamp. There are a few different ones to be aware of. So RE, as seen on this example, is Regio Esercito, which means Italian Army. That is going to be the majority of them. The ones that I've seen most commonly are Army examples. There's also RM, Regia Marina, that is the Navy. RA, Regia Aeronautica, is the Air Force. You'll also see an eagle wearing a crown, which is the Royal Air Force. And then there's also a police marking, PS, for Publica Sicurezza. Again, I apologize for my pronunciations here. That about covers the markings we're going to be going over here. There are other markings on this gun, but that covers what we will be discussing. Now, disassembly. It's actually pretty simple. Put the gun on safe, remove your magazine, lock the gun open, and while we've got the gun open, we can check and make sure that it is in fact empty. And now, give the barrel a smack. And it should come free. Getting the angle correct to pull it out can be a little bit difficult, but it's not too big of a deal. Now release the safety and guide the slide off. If you release the safety without holding onto the slide, it could go flying. It is under a bit of spring tension. Then you've got your guide rod and recoil spring. So there we go. Like I said, pretty simple. Put it back together, take your recoil spring, stick that end in the slide, slide onto the rails here. Make sure your recoil spring is lined up correctly. Oh, actually I forgot, the safety does come free when you pull off the slide. So there's that. Anyway, safety, try and get that angle correct to get it back in here. There we go. Now, slide on. Make sure your spring is in the correct place. Slide all the way back and lock it once more. Take your barrel. And you will find there is definitely kind of a sweet spot for when you are inserting the barrel into the frame. And then to kind of hammer the barrel back into place a little better, you should be able to pull it in until it clicks with just your finger, but just let it fall down, let the slide fall by taking off the safety. And you may have to give it a couple of these to seat it properly. I have had experiences where after having taken the gun down, the first 2 or 3 times I attempted to fire it, it did not hit the striker. Once it starts working, it works just fine, but it has been something that I have noticed a few times in the past. So don't take your Beretta apart and then expect it to work immediately when you take it out to the range. You might want to, before storing it, if you're intending to use it, have a few rounds put through it. Anyway, that about covers it. So let's go ahead and take this thing back out to the range and put another mag through it.
Loading this thing is going to be much like most of the European pistols that we've taken a look at so far. So this is a heel release pistol. So what I often will do, you've got your 7-round mag, and I'll push back on that heel release with the back of the magazine, and then just insert it, and then you just slide it all the way until it clicks. This is a simple, straight blowback slide. So there you go. There is a safety. When the red dot is exposed, that is fire. And then that is safe. Let's go ahead and check real quick and see if the safety works actually. Seems to function. And now we're on fire. And again, 7 shots, 380 ACP. I think both times we hit 5 out of 7, so, for a gun that I haven't shot all that much yet, really not terrible. I apologize if the wind is affecting the video sound quality here. It is extremely windy today. Meanwhile, Beretta Model 234, definitely one that I'm glad to have. Definitely one that is going to be popping up in a lot of videos in the future. Hope you all enjoyed. Tom's Great Northwest Weaponry, and I'll see you all next time.